Okay, great. If everyone can hear me, welcome to Rules of Engagement, the New Era of Work Part 2. There may be some of you that joined us uh, last year when we kind of looked at, again, the kind of work as we know it in the midst and kind of semi pre-pandemic and people returning to the workplace and hybrid work and remote work. Now we're going to do the same, I think, now that we're back at it and people are eager to get back into the offices. There has been the announcement of the right to request remote work. Hybrid working models have been applied across the board. So it is now just to have a look at where we're at, the legalities around it, how we can approach it, how we can help employees, how employers can help their business, and that sort of thing. My name is Henry Daly. I'm a head of marketing for Glandore, and we're co-hosting this event with Ronan, Daly, Jermyn. Jennifer Cashman, the employment partner in RDJ, is with us here. She's over 20 years experience in the industry, advising some of Ireland's largest indigenous and international firms, so a wealth of knowledge there. Aaron Doyle is also here with us. Aaron is the EMEA HR manager for Sendoso. It's the world's largest sending platform, really influential and impressive tech company, come all the way from the West Coast in the US, and a great team that's being built here at the moment in Ireland and Dublin through Aaron and his team. Brian Kelly, the Director of Corporate Care Relocation, is also with us. He was on the panel the last time around, which was great. It's just a wealth of experience there. Corporate Care help, again, some of the largest multinationals in Ireland landing here, building teams and expanding. And Joyce Rigby Jones, the Joint Managing Director of Voltedge Human Resources, with us here as well. Joyce has kind of worked as a senior human resources advisor and consultant for many, many years with some of the largest companies in Ireland and abroad. And Voltedge is one of the leading Irish HR management consultancy firms as well. So a stellar panel we have today. So looking forward to getting started. Just a bit of housekeeping for the panelists or participants. Up on your top right corner, there's a little layout button if you want to turn it into gallery mode. And down in the bottom right corner, there's the chat function if you want to ask a couple of questions as we're going. But we'll kick off and get into the meaty stuff now. So just with my co-host, Jennifer, the first question will go to you. So kind of, again, from a legal perspective, just on the back of the announcements in recent weeks from the state and the advice that has been given and the fact that we're fully open, what are the kind of responsibilities from companies from a kind of legal or HR perspective in terms of hybrid working, the return to the office, and kind of the right to request remote?
Yeah, thanks, Henry. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be back with you today for our event. We're delighted to be partnering with Glandore and thrilled to have Joyce and Aaron and Brian on our panel today. Some great insights available from all of them. And I suppose it's a really positive time for us to host this event now that we're coming out of the pandemic. We're out of the emergency phase. Things can go back to normal, whatever normal may look like going forward for everybody. So I suppose it's a really positive time from that perspective, given what we've dealt with over the last number of years. There are obviously other things happening in the world today that aren't so positive, but nonetheless, we'll focus on the positives in terms of the pandemic for the purposes of today's event. So yes, Henry, I suppose in terms of, the restrictions effectively now are being all but removed as of next week. We'll have all of the pandemic restrictions pretty much removed. So for employers and focusing, I suppose, for the purposes of today on employers, that means employers can really now plan in terms of the return to the workplace and what that looks like and who's returning and when they're returning and how often they're going to be there. From a legal perspective, I suppose things are back to where they were pre-pandemic. So from, strictly speaking, from a legal perspective, employers have contracts of employment that set out places of work. And strictly speaking, an employer can now say, we're back to normal, we're reopening the workplace and we'd like to have you back. The government obviously has been very much pushing the remote work agenda throughout the pandemic. I suppose that was something that had started back in 2019 pre-pandemic, and then obviously it was accelerated significantly with the pandemic. So I suppose there is a sort of an enthusiasm there from the government side to push this idea of remote working. I suppose it solves quite a lot of other problems from the government's perspective, from a wider political perspective in terms of housing issues and all of those additional political issues. And on the back of that, Leo Varadkar had promised for some time that he would publish legislation giving employees the right to request remote work. We now have heads of bill around that. They're not particularly specific. What they do is they give an employee the right to request remote work, and it is remote work, so it's not necessarily working from home, and it's not flexible work, it's remote work. So it's quite a specific concept. And I suppose over the course of the pandemic, and you've heard me say this numerous times before, it has been a little bit frustrating that some of the terms they're being conflated a bit. So you have people talk about flexible work, remote work, hybrid work as if they're all the same, and they're not. They're quite different concepts, and in fact they're quite different concepts even from a definition perspective, but they're also quite different concepts from an organizational perspective. So what RDJ considers to be flexible work might be different to what Sendoso considers to be flexible work, and therefore they're also different in terms of employees' interpretation of what they are, because what I consider to be flexible for me might not be what Aaron considers to be flexible for him. So it's quite important, I think, for employers to understand that there's a lot of terminology and a lot of phrases out there, but they mean different things to different people, and employers need to be very careful that they are very clear about what they're talking about. So what we are going to have is, we are going to have before the summer, as we understand it, legislation that gives employees the right to request remote work, and it also sets out that employers can refuse that request, and it gives, as things currently stand, a non-exhaustive list of reasons as to why an employer might refuse that request. That may change. I've never seen such a reaction to heads of a bill in the 24 hours after that heads of bill were published. There was huge reaction, huge commentary from both sides, some positive, a lot negative. So we're likely to see a lot of changes to that legislation, I think, as it makes its way through the legislative process, as we get the draft bill, and then that draft bill makes its way through the Doyle and the Shannon. I anticipate we'll see a lot of changes. So what we end up with before the summer might be quite different, but as far as we can tell, all we're going to have is a right to request remote work, which is very different to anybody getting a right to get remote work or to get flexible working. I think the reality, though, is the market is now dictating. So leave aside the legislation, and the law generally takes a little bit of time to catch up anyway with what's happening in the market, and that's certainly the case with our employment legislation in Ireland, and I think it's going to be the case in relation to this issue. So whilst we may have a legal framework around it, the reality is the market is now dictating that people have become used to a certain way of working during the pandemic. And while I don't think anybody wants or envisages a situation where they'll be at home all of the time or working remotely all of the time, I think there is an appreciation amongst all employers, whether that be from the SME sector, from the multinational sector, that really there is a desire on the part of employees to have this hybrid model of working, and that looks as if it's here to stay. So I think the market, leaving aside whatever the law might do, I think the market may dictate more of what happens here going forward than the legal situation.
Just, Joyce, this will be you, just in terms of it may depend on industry in terms of the demand for hybrid versus, as in, we work the flexible workspace sector. Our business is very hands-on. We've seen our own staff getting back, also from a lot of our clients that work in varied sectors that kind of need hands on deck. Some SMEs and some kind of aviation and law, finance that kind of need bodies in and bodies together to make the business function. So it's probably easier for some than others. But are you seeing that in terms of that sort of the pressure on an organisation to deliver on hybrid proposals varying per industry?
Absolutely, Henry, and thanks so much for inviting me on. We're dealing with a vast range of companies across all sectors, and they all have been working away on this for many months now, because they obviously were planning on this sort of return to work when things eased up on the COVID front. Many of them have already put in policies that they know have to be fluid, but they're already saying, well, we in principle are going to have a hybrid working environment, and that's the way we're going to approach it. Other companies are saying, well, actually, we may go fully remote. Others are saying, actually, you know something, we need collaboration, we need physical contact with our employees, and we want them back in. So I think really from a company perspective, they are being very sensible. They're thinking about their business model, what's best for the business, what's the strategy, and the best way then to look at your model that you're going to approach it is then say, well, what suits the business? How are we going to deal with our employees? Now, many of the SMEs have been really good with their employees, facilitating home working. And as Jennifer quite rightly says, remote working and home working aren't the same thing. So some of our companies have been saying they can work anywhere, or they can actually even go abroad if they wish for a period of time, and are building that into their policies. However, those tend to be multinationals anyway, where they can cope with the tax issues, and we'll hear more about that, I'm sure, later. Other companies are saying, listen, we're happy for you to maybe work at home for half the week. We're seeing a lot of companies considering even a 4-day week. We heard about this more in the UK originally, and now it's beginning to seep over here, where a lot more companies are considering changing the work hours and how people work. And I think what we're suggesting all the time to our companies, you know, try things out, but always say this is a trial. Don't embed your changes at the moment. We've new legislation coming down on the remote working bill. We'll have other impacts coming down the line. It's very fluid. So we're saying don't change the contract of employment at the moment. Just say that if you're doing anything, it's trialing, put in a trial period if you wish, and that it's being piloted perhaps. And obviously for employees that can't do their work anywhere else, like if I'm a receptionist, I can't be anywhere but at the reception desk, you know, nail that and make sure that you have clear instructions that there are positions and maybe even departments in an organization that cannot work remotely, and that won't be an option going forward, whatever happens. So it's maybe a good time to look at educating employees on what is and may be possible without tying yourself down to anything that might set precedents or cause problems for you going forward. Well, you're on mute there, Henry.
Still a lot of learning and understanding in terms of kind of the employer, but also the employee. So you're probably right in terms of there needs to be a bit of patience and understanding from both sides of the coin to make things progress and to kind of benefit the business in the best way for everyone.
It's interesting. Some companies are being quite progressive and thinking ahead and thinking what's good for them and what's good for their culture. And you see some companies saying that they're actually saying they're remote friendly. So if you were applying to them, they're remote friendly, or that they're remote first. So in the future, they may take on people remotely, and that's their option. Other companies that we deal with have said no, they're going completely back to normal in the office, and they know they're going to lose some people, but that's what they want to do. That's their strategy. So again, it's really thinking about your strategy, what's best for the business and what's best for your employees.
Okay, brilliant. Aaron, one for you, just in terms of someone who's been building a team with a very established company, but a new entrant to the Irish market. Kind of as you've been hiring and building, how have you seen kind of requests or need change? Obviously, it's important for you to have people in as you're building a team and culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we've always said to people, the line that we've used is come in for a purpose. And what we mean by that is come in when you're going to collaborate with your team. Come in to do an interview, come in to do a design session, come in to do, you know, some piece of work where that transfer of knowledge happens in person really, really well. Sometimes with our, say, our customer support team, for example, we'd see something new might pop up and being able to turn to the person beside you and say, hey, have you seen this before? And then that happens, that kind of transfer of knowledge happens very quickly, as opposed to saying, I'm going to send this email, I'm going to log this ticket, I'm going to kind of move that way. That transfer of information happens quite quickly, and that works really well. The other aspect we say is, social can be a purpose. When we were trying to build the team, trying to get people together when we could, and getting to know your colleagues is as much of a purpose as, managing your workload or anything like that. So that's what we've always said is come in for a purpose, and people seem to it works well for us, and the team really like it in terms of kind of obligations for us in terms of providing, home working setup. We've always said we want people to be safe and we want people to be comfortable. And what that looks like is looking at getting desks set up and making sure people have a safe space of work that's ergonomically friendly and they're not putting themselves at any risk of potential injury or anything like that, any neck strains or anything like that, shoulder injuries that we hear about. But the other aspect is making sure that they can do good work. They're comfortable. They're not working at the end of their bed, or they're not, working at the kitchen table. Trying to have these hygiene factors where you can kind of detach from work and having this kind of purpose set up. So we'd, look to provide a desk, a chair, trying to make sure we have the right measurements so we can kind of fit it into people's homes and stuff like that. Just trying to have some sort of space that's potentially away. But we do very much kind of caveat that with the idea of coming into the office for a purpose, and that's really important as well. Being able to get together in person, gather, be it socially, be it to do a piece of work, be it to do an interview, that's really important as well, and we don't kind of neglect that aspect.
Yeah, that sounds like the way to do it, and probably energizes people if it's approached in that way. There's value in everything that's done. Brian, this kind of veers into you then in terms of what corporate care relocation do and how you help companies get staff in and get them settled. So just in terms of that culture element that Aaron was speaking of, are you seeing companies put different initiatives in place or have different demands on how they'll get employees in and get them landed, and what the preferences are or the priorities?
Yeah, I think Aaron captured it very well there, because he's building a team from a startup, but if I even look at it from our own business point of view, where we have 60 staff, so we're a well-established company, but 10 of those staff were hired in the last year. So it's not just companies who are growing from zero, it's companies who are existing and who are, adding to their staff, or looking for new skills. Trying to embed those people into your company's culture is extremely important. And one of the main things that our next step is really to get everybody together for the first time in person, because it's now more than 2 years since everybody was in the same room together. And when you have an SMB sized company, one of the benefits of that culture is everybody knows each other, everybody gets on well together, and it doesn't seem faceless or soulless, because we're all in this together. But some of those 10 people who started in the last year won't know the other 50, and won't have had the opportunity to meet them. So I think the very first thing, now that some of the restrictions have been lifted, is to get people face to face. Like up to now, what we found that has been important through the pandemic is communication. Your communication has been crucial in keeping the team together, keeping everybody going in the same direction, and trying to hold together some elements of your corporate culture. It needed to be a very clear communication, but also very supportive, because people were going through difficult times and they weren't there in front of you. It's very easy to have that type of conversation in person and reassure somebody and keep them in the fold when it's face to face. But we found the difficulty, or the thing that people were challenged most with over the last 2 years, was to have the appropriate communication. But thankfully, with our company, we're getting everybody together at the start of April, and we hope that will be kind of back to some sort of normality. However, the ongoing situation is always now going to be, it's not going to snap back to the way it was originally. And as the other panelists have mentioned, it is going to be a hybrid or something different. So, but I think the reset is to get everybody face to face.
Yeah, and get them back into that mode, and it's switching pace almost in a way for everyone. And Joyce, that kind of takes me to you for the next question. In terms of kind of, there's an element of eagerness for people to get back in, and employers want to, again, as Aaron and Brian are saying, face-to-face collaboration, quickness of decision making. Do you think as a result now there'll be more opportunity for those that are present and insight to progress versus those that are remote? Will it be an out of sight, out of mind, or if it's managed correctly, will it be an equal opportunity for all in terms of progression within?
Yeah, it's a great question, Henry. I think we've seen during COVID how some employees have thrived in a Zoom world and others haven't. And there is a definite need for companies to understand that they've got to give the same opportunities to those people working remotely or hybridly as to those who are on site all the time. And for graduates, and as Brian was mentioning, some of these employees that have never actually been in the workplace, it's vital that we make sure that they get that opportunity, whether it's only just to go in and have meetings, or whether they're actually going to start going back into the office space or site on a regular basis. So it's a real management challenge, and managers really have to step up to the plate here, because they are the ones that are going to actually engage with these employees. For SMEs, at least the one thing that they probably know all of these employees. For graduates, you've got to, they want the interaction. They probably need to get back on site more than others. For new employees, how are you going to do induction? If you're going to do it remotely, make sure that it's really professional and really effective in terms of getting them on board. And the other thing, I suppose, is the inclusion in teams. Even if you're having calls and you have half the people in a meeting room, half of them are remote, that everyone has that etiquette to get people involved on the call so everyone gets talking. So there's a whole etiquette of running hybrid meetings, having people in and out on site, and managers have to become very proficient at this. So we're really suggesting to companies, think about this. You need to think also about unconscious bias, whereby managers probably think, well, that employee gets on with their job, that's fine, we leave them to it, whilst actually they might be the one that needs help more than anyone. So it's got to be more contact, more touch points with employees all the time, and really driving that contact and connectivity, and also the inclusion piece. So it's going to be hard work. There's no getting away from this. If you're going down a hybrid model, you're going to have to work at it. And if you want to keep those employees engaged, you've got to be consistent, and you've got to look at training and career progression in a very fair manner.
Yeah, communication and support are going to be key. That in turn then takes me to you, Jennifer, because Joyce had mentioned kind of SMEs and kind of staff management there. It's different to how the multinationals do it. There seems to be a bit of a talent war ongoing at the moment, and I think what's on offer in certain companies and can differ, but certain companies will have the ability to offer more hybrid, more remote, kind of more salaries, that kind of thing. Do you think SMEs will struggle? And particularly there was a question from one of the attendees there around graduates entering the workforce. So in terms of SMEs struggling to keep staff and graduates kind of trying to get into the workforce, it's two-pronged in terms of how do you see that moving on as companies manage the return?
Yeah, it's tricky, Henry. I mean, as Joyce has said, I mean, I keep saying this to clients as well, that, a hybrid model where you haven't had one before, if you take the law sector, I mean, we're a classic sector where it was very much about presenteeism and being in the office or whatever. And now we have a hybrid working model, and it is a fundamentally different way of doing our business and managing our staff and managing everybody. And I think the first thing is, and Joyce has said it, there has to be an investment by businesses in this. So there's a financial cost to this, and there's a time cost to it. You can't expect managers who've been managing, sort of a team of people in the office, and that's the way that they've traditionally managed people, to suddenly be able to flip over to managing a hybrid scenario and expect them to do it without any support or without any training. And Enterprise Ireland and are there for SMEs, and they've got some really good initiatives for available for SMEs, and they're very passionate about supporting SMEs through this journey, because it's ultimately benefits everybody if everybody can get through this and work together and ultimately give people ultimately what they want, but at the same time we're all here to get the job done and run our businesses. So I think for SMEs, I think it's going to be a question of looking to see what supports are there, first of all, in terms of financial supports, training supports. They all need to be looked at. I mean, this is a plan. This isn't about drafting a policy and saying, oh, look, we offer a hybrid model, there you go, and putting the policy in the drawer and hoping for the best. There is a whole investment around this and a whole different way of looking at your business. And it's all a positive thing, and there are the supports there, but I think businesses will just go and will just need to go and find the supports and make sure that they are providing providing the support for line managers as well as for the employees who find themselves. And there is a war for talent. It's in every sector. I mean, it's in the legal. It's every sector I speak to is having challenges, and that's probably to be expected given what we've gone through over the last couple of years. And I think for graduates, I mean, certainly our experience here in terms of graduates, they're coming to us as trainees. They want to be in the office. But equally they want to be in the office, but then they need people in the office to mentor them as well. There's no point in them being in the office and they're the only ones in the office and everybody else is working from home. So I think there has to be a realization as well on the part of those of us that are more established in our careers that it's very easy for us to decide maybe to work from home, but at the same time we owe a responsibility to those coming behind us. There is a mentoring obligation on us, and there's a duty on all of us to make sure that obligation is being met. And when you're looking at organizing working from home, rather than leaving it to sort of everybody to decide themselves whenever they're I don't feel like going in today, I'll just work from home today, well, then is there somebody else on your team that's there to help and mentor the graduate who is delighted to come in every day because they want to be there, because they want to be on site and they want to learn. So there's a whole structure around this and a whole lot of thought that needs to go into it, so that it's not just an ad hoc arrangement where nobody's happy, and particularly our younger graduates who need the mentoring and need the support, and only right and proper that they should get that. So I'm very conscious that clients will come to us and say, oh, can you help us draft a policy? Of course we can help you draft a policy, but there's a whole lot more around it than just drafting a policy. There's a training, there's a thinking about how the training works, how to make sure. And then we've the culture piece and the communication piece that Brian and Joyce and Aaron have mentioned. Communication obviously is hugely important, but culture as well. I suppose there always was, maybe culture was always attached to the workplace and you got a sense maybe of the culture when you went into the physical workspace. So if the physical workspace isn't going to be the sort of center of the universe anymore, then organizations do need to think about their culture, and they do need to think about, if I'm sitting at home at my desk and somebody offers me 20,000 more to do the same job sitting at the same desk at home, well, sure, why wouldn't I move to that company? What's going to keep me in this company? What's going to keep me bound to this company? And that's going to come back to culture and feeling like I'm belonging to something and feeling like I'm part of a journey and feeling like we all have a purpose. So we all really, as all of our businesses, need to give fairly significant thought to that, so that we can make sure that people are on a journey with us and they're enjoying that journey and they feel part of and belonging to a company that they want to stay in and remain part of.
Yeah, because that can often kind of trump salary in a lot of, if
100%.
people are comfortable and happy and challenged and feel like they're kind of on the boat with the good team, it'll be tough to uproot them. Just speaking of that then, Brian, in terms of the so-called war for talent and what we're kind of coming into this year, and it may be more competitive in certain industries, as you're helping a lot of the multinationals kind of land staff and get staff set up, is there more of a difficulty trying to get the influx of foreign talent that we need to complement our indigenous talent, or how is it looking now compared to last year?
Yeah, well, there is that demand across every sector. As there's skill shortages in every different area, companies are more and more looking to be on the EEA, which means that you get into the whole area of employment permits. And this year, I would imagine we've probably hit about 20,000 employment permits, a record high, which would mean 20,000 new people coming into Ireland to work from outside the EU. The difficulty there for the companies is the lead times associated with that. Currently, they've stretched to as long as 20 weeks to obtain an employment permit. And then if you have somebody, say, coming from India, you need to add an entry visa on top of that. So you're really looking at anything up to 6 months to get somebody in. So if you're crying out for new talent or specific skills, that's a very long lead time. It affects lots of companies who are well established in Ireland, but where it affects companies even more, the new entrants to the market who maybe need to transfer somebody from one of their other plants internationally, or from a sister company, and equally the lead times are as long there. So there has been some good news about it in recent weeks. Like, to be fair to the department, they have announced that they're going to treble the staff of processors. But of course, those people have to be trained, and we all know if once you start training people, it actually slows you down a little bit at first as well. So I'd say, give them a few weeks or maybe next month, and we should start seeing that the backlog from COVID being eaten into and the increased demand being tackled. So we're pretty hopeful that we're probably at the worst case scenario right now, but that things will get better over the year ahead. But it's certainly frustrating, for the type of clients you and I see who are new into Ireland, and in terms of making their plans, maybe for the first person to land on the ground, it's going to be 6 months before they see them, and that's very long term.
And it can be costly, and it slows up kind of progression and stuff. And then I suppose for the employee waiting to come to take the role, there could be someone that might on the ground that the company could find that might suit the role better, and that kind of thing. But it's like we're seeing it again with a number of the companies we house that are very eager to be in their offices and get people together and kind of get that mix of Indigenous and foreign staff. But it's just taken that bit longer to get everyone together because of exactly what you've said in terms of wait times. But Aaron, you're probably best positioned to comment on this in terms of you were the first Irish or EMEA even employee for Sendoso, and you've been building the team for the last few months. Have there been particular departments that have been easier to fill than others, or has it just been easier, difficult across the board?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, like it's like everyone has said, the battle for talent at the moment is incredible. It's a total employees market, and trying to fill roles in general can be difficult. We would definitely find there are some kind of labour shortages, and it kind of falls into what we're seeing with the likes of the critical skills list and the roles that qualify there. The likes of engineering and kind of technical talent, software engineers and people in that space, that can definitely be trickier to fill than kind of other roles, just due to the nature of there is a shortage in that space. We're probably seeing that across other industries as well that I'm maybe not familiar with. I was speaking with somebody before that runs a hotel, and they were saying they're really struggling to get bar staff. But bar staff, for example, wouldn't be seen as critical skills at the moment. So I think when we're looking at the kind of overall demographic, there might be a kind of a change in what that looks like. For us, we found it is definitely hard to get talent at the moment. There's one or two particular types of role that are more difficult to fill. And I'd imagine that's the same across lots of different businesses and lots of different industries. We're probably having that conversation. And like Brian said, when we do look at, potentially having people join our teams from different countries, it's a long process, and it can take quite a while. And I'm not sure what this will look like in time. Hopefully those processing times change, and we can see those labour shortages kind of replenish. But for the moment, it can be a real challenge for people, for sure.
I think we're challenging all that it is. I think we're lucky in Ireland to have excellent universities, and there should be a good chunk, speaking of graduates earlier, there should be a good chunk of talent coming out and into the workforce over the next year and into the following years. I think we're very lucky in that sense. But Jennifer, we're talking about kind of the mix of Indigenous and foreign talent on the ground in Ireland, but another thing to look at now, and as companies get back to sort of in the office, in person, whether it's full-time or hybrid, addressing the kind of working from abroad element of the return to normality. How do you think, in terms of the legalities around it, the right to request remote, is it factored in under that, or is it on a case by case, or how do companies approach it?
Yeah, and Joyce has alluded to this already, that there are certain companies that have it easier in this space than others because they have what we call, from a tax perspective, permanent establishments in lots of jurisdictions. So there isn't any risk that if somebody decides to work from Spain or France, if the company already is established in those jurisdictions, then obviously they can facilitate that because they have the existing framework to do it. and it doesn't necessarily expose them from a tax perspective. For a company that doesn't have a permanent establishment in a particular remote foreign location, and an employee says, I want to go to Greece for 6 weeks, and I'll have part holiday and I'll take my 2 weeks holidays in Greece, and then I'll work for the other 4 weeks from there. But the company doesn't have an existing permanent establishment in Greece. There are all sorts of tax implications for that, potential employment law implications too, but they're more, in practice, it's more of a tax issue than it is an employment law issue. So a lot of companies are having to approach this on the basis that they can't facilitate it, and they won't facilitate it because they're not prepared to take the tax risk. And of course, it's quite tricky for companies because a lot of companies facilitated people returning to home locations across the globe during the pandemic to avoid any difficulties around travel, particularly in the very early days when we had the very strict lockdowns. And now those employees are slow to return because it's working fine as far as they're concerned, but maybe not so much as far as the employer is concerned. And then there is a potential revenue risk attached to that as well. So that actually is a very live issue for a lot of organizations at the moment who still have people who went abroad during the pandemic, and they're trying to call them back basically, and that's proving to be maybe a little bit trickier than they had anticipated. So organizations are having to look at this on a case-by-case basis. It does depend on the organization. The bigger the organization with more facilities around the globe, then the easier probably this issue is for them. But as I say, for other organizations that don't have a lot of facilities around the globe, it is a trickier issue because it does raise tax issues. So a lot of employers are having to confirm that they're not going to facilitate it, and they're not going to be in a position to facilitate it. So a lot of the bigger multinationals have given a list of locations from which people can work for a certain period of time each year, for whether it be 4 weeks or 6 weeks. But the reason they've given a list is because that's the list of locations that they happen to have establishments in anyway. So that's why they can facilitate it, whereas they won't facilitate it in other locations where they can't, where they don't already have a permanent establishment. So it's a huge tax issue, and organizations are having to look at it, and organizations need to be very careful that they're not setting a precedent by allowing people to do something that maybe they haven't thought through all of the implications from it. And just because something was allowed during an emergency phase of the pandemic doesn't make it the norm, and doesn't make it something that people should necessarily be allowed to do as a matter of course.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's essential, obviously, to look after the employee, but the employers also have to look after the company and the needs of the company
100%.
in order for survival, for people to have jobs and
100%.
places to work. So it's almost like creating a hierarchy of needs in a way, in terms of company first, because that's what keeps everyone in employment, and then filter down in terms of, while always considering kind of employee well-being and culture. But Brian, just coming to you, outside of that, looking at that and the sort of element of people working from abroad, whether they had permission or not, in certain instances, is it harder now from your perspective in terms of companies landing here, setting up Irish operations, to try and get site leads or staff either into Ireland or back to Ireland to work and set up and kind of move from there?
Yeah, so Henry, you and I, we work a lot in the FDI space, so we're often seeing new companies establishing themselves in Ireland for the first time, and not all of them are lucky enough to have somebody like Aaron, to lead things, a local guy who knows the scene, because a lot of these companies might be coming from the US or India or China, and their preference would be to bring in their own people to get established, and then to hire local staff, Irish staff thereafter, or European staff. From an immigration point of view, the difficulty there is the 50-50 rule. So this is a rule in Irish immigration where you cannot have more than 50% of your staff on employment permits being, non-EEA nationals. And over time, that generally is not a factor. So if you have 20 people employed, the chances are, 10 or more of them are going to be from the EU. Where it really impacts people is at the very start. So if you are, the site lead coming in from, let's say, India, and you're the first person on the ground, well, then you're automatically breaking the 50-50 rule. You need somebody in place before you get here to balance your employment. But how do you hire that person if you're only new to Ireland and you're only getting the operation established? Now there is a change to the immigration law. You know, it's being discussed at the moment, and one of the elements of it is to waive the 50-50 rule for the first person on the ground. And so that would answer your question for site leave. That would make it far easier. And most companies would accept that as a reasonable compromise, that if they could bring in their one guy from the US or one lady from India or whatever it happens to be as the site lead, they won't mind hiring a local and then bringing in another international person, then another local, another international person, and keeping within the 50-50 rule. But it's that very first person on the ground that we see this as a stumbling block a lot of the time.
Okay. And will that continue, do you think, or like, is there a way to address it to try and?
Well, there are two things happening here. One is that the law may change, and it may actually get waived for the first person on the ground, and that would certainly help. The second is that the companies who are involved with the IDA, you know, they can get support from the IDA to help waive it. But not every company that we see coming in is of the size that, you know, they require IDA support. So for some of the smaller companies, actually, it's more concerning than for, say, large multinationals. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it's really interesting, I think, but I suppose it's great to see the sort of war for talent is a good complaint in a way. It just means that we have excellent talent on the ground here, but it's making sure what companies are offering suits it so that you can keep them, and then the culture is key. So Joyce, just looking at that, we have a couple of questions here, and some of them are regards to the kind of 4-day week when it comes to hybrid. Some companies can do it, some companies can't. As we've said, it depends on what's needed for the operation. But the first question kind of in that is, do you think companies may lose staff if they don't offer the kind of work from home option or the 4-day week or whatever the hybrid setup might be? Or will employees just, they want to work for a particular company and they work based on what that company needs?
There's a couple of answers to that, I suppose, Henry. Firstly, employees are definitely, following COVID, they're taking life decisions and they're deciding whether they want to move because they want more flexibility in the workplace. Maybe they don't have any flexibility. Sometimes they're looking at even companies in terms of sustainability and culture, and that's really high in their agenda. So it's amazing how more I suppose more mature the reason for moving is than it used to be. And certainly we're seeing employees definitely saying, well, I need flexibility. I want to go to a hybrid work environment. Maybe I want that 4-day. There are other companies who are saying, no, we are absolutely not doing that. And, you know, we're going to be a 5-day week in the office. And some employees are quite happy with that. So it's horses for courses, I think. And companies have to take decisions on what is best for them. I mean, some companies are going to lose people anyway. They will make decisions. We're finding a lot of people leaving companies are making the decisions not just because of their job or their manager anymore. It's because of that life decision. They want certain things in life. Maybe they want to change their career. They want different hours of work, whatever it might be. So in some cases, an employer can't keep an employee. They're just going to go. But you've got to think also about the company's culture. I think that's so important. And we've seen a lot of what we call culture decay in the last 2 years, where people have been remote and that culture sort of vanished. And we mentioned this, you know, employers need to think about how they're driving their culture. And what we often say is your existing employees are your best culture ambassadors. So get them involved. We're talking about peer culture panels for interviews even. We're talking about using that established employee who's really happy in their job as an ambassador, talking to new employees or potential employees, and use that because that's there already. So I think there's lots of things employers can do, but certainly, you know, there is going to be attrition. There was a work human survey done late last year, and it said that 42% of Irish workers that took part in that were thinking or going to look for a new job in the next 12 months. So we are up against it. But you know something, it's better to have an employee staying for the right reason than keeping them for the wrong reason.
Yeah. And culture seems to be king in terms of buy-in and stuff like that. And we're very lucky in Glandore in terms of, again, we're an SME, we're a family business, and it does feel like kind of big all
Yeah.
together family, and everyone's mucking in. And then we have the luxury of working with the likes of Aaron and Sendoso and companies from indigenous firms and US firms lending, and we get to soak up elements of their culture. And I had a bit of fun in Aaron's office there on Friday afternoon, so it's great. But Aaron, do you find it kind of, is there a lot of pressure then? Is it a big chunk of workload to keep? Obviously, you talked about everyone having to focus on their day jobs and personal workloads.
Yeah.
But is there pressure on in terms of keeping the culture, or is it just getting them bought in from the outset and then it flows?
Yeah, so I think culture has become a real kind of strategic pillar for companies now. When we talk about this war on talent, it's not just, you know, the compensation package that people are attracted to. It's the flexibility, it's the trust, it's the autonomy, it's the what do my deliverables look like and how can I deliver them? Being given this ownership is really important, and that's part of your culture. There's a social aspect, but there's, you know, culture refers to the way we do things around here. That's all encompassing. That's not kind of any one aspect. And I think, you know, you want to hire the right people and you want to let that flourish and you want to kind of guide it and guard it, but never, it's not where one team or one group owns it. You want to support it and let it grow. And what we've always said is to our team is we want you to do kind of two things. We want you to be curious and we want you to be kind. We want you to be curious in that you have an open kind of growth mindset and you're happy to learn, you're happy to grow and develop, and as the org does, and we're quite lucky that we're in a kind of a hyper growth business. But we want you to be kind as well, and we don't need to delve into what that looks like. It's not the usual kind of corporate, but we say, you know, it's much nicer working with a kind person than somebody maybe that isn't kind. And that's worked really well. And what we've done with that then is we've said to people, we want you to gather and we want you to communicate based on kind of the interest of shared interests, identities, hobbies, and values. So finding something that you get along with somebody within those kind of four. And you put that all together and you get this really nice kind of collaboration that you're not talking about it, you're just supporting it, and you let people bring the best to the table. And it's worked really, really well for us. I think we've seen 30% of our kind of team been built through the referral channel. And that's quite nice to be able to say that we've, you know, our people are saying that they want their pals to come and work. And then once you get that kind of foundation set, it's going to snowball from there. And you kind of, Henry, you've been in with us, and yeah, you kind of attested what I'm talking about here. It's good fun as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. But it's a fantastic energy to walk into. And that as I say, that's why we're so lucky in the business, because we deal with so many companies and we house so many different companies with different cultures. To be able to soak it up and just take bits and pieces from it and apply it ourselves is fantastic. But it gets you, I think, walking into that energy, it's palpable and it gets you going, which is great.
Henry, you do have international culture to consider. There's a lot of big investments in Ireland now in locations like Dundalk or Leixlip or Athlone or Nina, you know, not even outside of the bigger cities. And it is a challenge now for leaders of those companies and HR management to integrate various foreign cultures into their corporate culture. And we're seeing that quite a lot. So there's probably more of a demand in the market at the moment for that kind of international cultural training than there ever was before.
Yeah, and very, very important, but also, as you're very beneficial to everyone working there, just that diversity piece that you talked about, Joyce, and just the enjoyment of learning and getting, again, submerged in different cultures and that kind of thing. It can only be positive for everyone, and it just, again, adds to the substance of what people are involved in and the values. Just getting back now to a couple of the questions there. This one is for you, Jennifer, just in terms of some of the legalities around getting back to normality. I know in the first episode, we discussed kind of employer liability around working from home, but that was very different because the state had forced everyone into remote work, whereas now we're not. So does the same rules apply? Where does the employer stand in that? And that's a very important thing, I think, for everyone to understand going forward.
Yes, and if you got my team together right now, the one thing we would say is that employers seem to think that just because they're going to allow people or facilitate people to work from home, that suddenly there's no obligations on employers. Well, they asked us to work from home, so sure, if we allow them to work from home, sure, they've asked us. But the rules and the legalities around it didn't change. So when we had the emergency stage of the pandemic, the health and safety legislation, the organisation of working time legislation, that all stood side by side with the requirement for everybody to work from home, and that still remains the position where employers are facilitating people, where they've introduced a policy and they're allowing people to work from home. The employer still has obligations, and the obligation is to provide a safe place of work. So just like Aaron said, Sendoso are providing the equipment to allow people to work safely from home. That is the employer's obligation. You must, under the health and safety legislation, provide the equipment necessary for the individual to do their job. So if that's a chair, if that's a desk, if that's a monitor, if that's a laptop, then you as the employer have that obligation. And employers are horrified when they hear that. And they're saying, but what? So I have to provide the desk at work and the desk at home? And the short answer is yes, you do. Now, not everybody wants it because people are living in houses, they have their houses set up, they don't necessarily want the employer's van arriving outside the door with a desk and a chair that they can't fit into their house. So there has to be collaboration and consultation with the employee, of course, in terms of what. But the employer's obligation is to make sure, as Aaron has said, that they're working from a location that is safe for their physical health and their mental health, and the employer has to act accordingly. So ergonomic assessments are still a requirement. They are really important. Employers have an obligation to make sure, and I mean, any policy that we're putting in place for employers, we're making it very clear that while an employee may request to work from home, if that is the hybrid model that is being looked at for some of the week, then the employee must have an appropriate setup at home to do that, so that we can't just allow them, as Aaron has said, to be perching on the side of their bed, as some people were during the pandemic. So we can't allow that as an employer. So if they don't have the setup at home, if they don't have the broadband, or if they don't have the system to work from home, then we may not be able to facilitate them working from home. And equally, I saw another question come in from Scott on the chat there around the flip side of this, which is employers deciding that they're going to ask people to work from home for periods of time, and maybe make some, different employers are looking at this differently, as Joyce has said. Some are saying some roles are fully remote now where they weren't before. What entitlement does the employee have to say, well, hang on a minute, I don't want to work from home, or I don't have the setup to work from home? What's the flip side? And the flip side is that if they were hired to do a role that was in a physical work location, and they're now being told by the employer that that has changed, well, then arguably we're into a redundancy situation, because the original role for which they applied and which they filled is now different and is now being changed by the employer. So, can an employee refuse to work from home because they don't have? Well, the short answer is yes, they can, if they don't have the setup to do that, and that's not what they signed up for. And we haven't seen that yet, but I anticipate that we'll see some of those issues coming down the track, where employees say, well, hang on a minute, this isn't what I signed up for the longer term. So there are some potential legal issues around that need to be looked at from an employer's perspective, where the employer is saying, not that we'll allow you to work from home if that's what you want, but actually we are forcing you to work from home for a period of time. So the obligations around working from home are there. They're there from a health and safety perspective. They're there from an organisation of working time perspective, where employers previously would have had people clocking in and out to their workplace, and that's how they recorded their working hours. If employers are no longer doing that, employers need to find a way to look at recording their working hours. That might be a technology solution that employers need to look at around that. So there, but all of those obligations, existing legal obligations around safe space of work, recording working hours, recording rest breaks, making sure that people are taking their rest breaks, the right to disconnect, around which we now have a code of practice since last April, all of those legal issues stand side by side. And even where the employer feels, well, I'm facilitating the work from home, well, the short answer is, if you don't want to take on all of those obligations to allow them to work from home, don't allow them to work from home, because all of those obligations are there from a legal perspective. And you have to talk to your insurance company, and you have to talk to your occupational health advisors, and you have to talk to your health and safety consultants. That's all part of the framework of developing a hybrid model where you're allowing people to work from somewhere other than their office location.
And all the expectations very different to what it was when we were all forced remote in a rush. And that's
Absolutely.
maybe for employees to consider, is that it's not as easy as just a yes or a no from an employer. Like there are those hurdles to consider, and it takes time, and it just may not be feasible because
Exactly. Yeah.
Henry, if I just cut in there, I mean, there's also the fairness and equality approach. You know, if you give one person flexibility on the team, potentially you have to be able to give everyone on that team the flexibility. So you really have to be thinking about fairness. You've got to be thinking about how you can offer equal opportunities if you're looking at hybrid, flexible, remote. And that is going to be a big issue for a lot of employers, where they feel, well, I could offer one person, but I can't offer them all. So how am I going to be fair across the piece? And I do think we'll see a lot of challenges in that area going forward.
Definitely. We're just coming into the last kind of few minutes. It's been a fantastic session again, but what I just want to do is for each of you just to give me, I'll start with Aaron, and it's just a single piece of advice in terms of, you're all coming from different industries, all extremely experienced. So just a snippet of advice for those listening in terms of how to manage, or kind of just a snippet from your perspective, advice on managing work yourself, whether employee or employer, out through the rest of the year.
Thanks for starting with me, Henry.
Yeah.
Yeah, put me on the spot. I mean, jeepers, it's as long as a piece of string, this question. I think if we're looking at potentially having hybrids and people working in a, let's just take that kind of hybrid capacity, having some people in the office and some people remote, I think making sure that your people that are working remote, for example, aren't getting forgotten about, that you're not creating this kind of silent hero effects. And what I mean by that is that you're not having people that are working very well remotely, but because they're not in the office, maybe their efforts aren't being seen and they're not getting the same opportunity to kind of market their efforts. And I think making sure that there's a very strong metric for what within roles and what good looks like versus what great looks like, and making sure that still can apply across somebody being in the office, somebody being hybrid, and somebody being remote, or whatever the company decides to operate with, and making sure there's a real fairness there around performance, so that if you do have somebody that's made the decision to work remote and it's been agreed by the business, that they're not working outside of the office doing incredible work and being forgotten about. I think managers need to make sure that from a performance point, that's been covered. And I think from a culture point, and it's like Joyce said earlier, that there's regular communication, that they're still being included. If there's a meeting, even the littlest things, if there's a meeting and everyone's in a meeting room and this person logs in remote, making sure that they're not forgotten about, that they're not just a name on a screen, that they're able to contribute, and they're, you know, little things like that, one-to-ones, all that good stuff. So that would be my piece if we were looking at that.
Keep everyone front of mind equally. Over to you, Brian, just your snippet of advice.
Yeah, just be careful. I always look to the people who are on employment permits, because that's our specialist area. Watch out that an employment permit is based on working in a particular location. So if you are having people work from home, you may need to notify the department of a change of working address. So people on employment permits, a special case, you might want to watch out for them slightly differently.
Excellent. And Joyce?
Yeah, I think this is a holistic decision for every company. So don't just look at flexible working, remote working. This is a business decision. Look at your business, look at how it's going to impact on you. Look at training and development and career progression. So this is a strategic decision you're making. How are you going to make sure that you're dealing with those people that Aaron mentioned who are remote? How are you connecting? Train your managers, train the employees to understand what the issues are with regard to the different types of working if you're going down that road. So this isn't just a one-off, this is a full business strategy that you're getting into here. It's not just talking about remote working.
Excellent. And Jennifer, over to you, just to close things out for us.
I suppose understanding your legal obligations, obviously, is where I'm coming from. So I think employers need to be very aware of legal obligations and the misconception that just because you're facilitating somebody to do something doesn't remove your legal obligations. So understanding those legal obligations, and I suppose keeping an eye on all of the legal developments we're expecting this year around statutory sick pay, around the right to request remote working, around the flexible working developments under the EU directive around retirement ages. A lot coming down the track at employers this year from an employment law perspective. So keeping abreast of developments and understanding. Training is huge. I really feel passionately about that, particularly for line managers in this new way of working. You have to invest in training. And I think using your network and you know, talking about these issues, because I think, you know, it's a lonely place, particularly for the HR community. I think HR can be a lonely role in a company. So use your network and, you know, find out from your peers in other companies and in other sectors what they're doing, because you can get some great advice and ideas from others around what they're doing. As you said, Henry, for Glandore, you know, looking into the companies that you act with and getting ideas from them. Use your networks and you know, talk about these issues, see what's working, see what's not working, and don't be afraid to change it if it's not working.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask. I think that's everyone, we
100%.
all need to understand everyone's in the same boat. It's probably the steepest learning curve employers
Absolutely.
we've all had to go through in the workplace ever. So it's be open and kind of have empathy for those situations and support people where you can. But
Absolutely.
look, to Jennifer from RDJ, Aaron from Sendoso, Brian from Corporate Care Relocation, and Joyce from Voltedge. Really thanks a million for your time. It's been even better than the first one, so we may have to do a third one. But really great, and I hope those watching and listening got some really helpful snippets from that. And again, we'll share the recording for those that missed it, and we'll share everyone's details. So if you do have specific questions or want to reach out, everyone's details are there, and touch base. And as I said, we're all here to help each other. It's about the big Brand Ireland network. That's the most important thing. So again, thanks to the panel and to everyone that attended, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Henry.
Cheers, folks.
Thanks,
Thanks, Henry.
Henry. Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
Take care, folks.
Thank you.